CPAC, one of the biggest events for conservatives in the country. President Trump is slated to speak there on Saturday, with VP Pence also scheduled to attend. And Congressman Jim Jordan, he spoke earlier today, a day after his fiery exchange with Michael Cohen on the Hill. But when my colleague Garrett Haake pressed him on questions about Cohen and North Korea, Jordan had nothing to say. Garrett Haake joins me now. Okie doke. Garrett, any other reaction to the Cohen testimony or the North Korea summit from any other Republicans?
Stephanie, it's been interesting. On North Korea, Republicans have been praising the president, although not on stage. This is not something people are going out of their way to discuss. But when I've asked some of these Republicans about the president's handling of the North Korea summit in Vietnam, they've said, look, sometimes you have to know when to walk away. I talked to Georgia Senator David Perdue. He's a very close ally of the president, on particularly on foreign affairs issues. He said the president was right to take no deal over a bad deal, and he hopes that the dialogue will continue. On Cohen, the answers have been even more interesting. The line from both the stage and offstage from conservatives has been essentially that the Cohen hearing was a sham hearing, they say, laying the groundwork for impeachment of this president, and that the only thing you could believe out of Cohen's mouth yesterday was the fact that he said they was not aware of there being any collusion. I've been trying to press some of these Republicans on that apparent hypocrisy, and no one is more representative of that conversation than Sean Spicer, the president's former press secretary, who I talked to a few minutes ago. Did you watch Michael Cohen yesterday? What did you make of that testimony?
I did. I think it reinforced what both sides wanted. People who Trump supporters realized that he wasn't truthful. He's convicted of lying to Congress, and he has a history of saying false things. And I think for Democrats, they tried to validate all of their preconceived notions about the president. But at the end of the day, I mean, this whole thing started because of Russia and allegations of collusion.
And that's been pretty much the line I've heard from many of these folks who would talk to me about the Cohen hearing specifically, that the collusion part is what matters and that everything else that Cohen said should largely be dismissed because they believe he simply can't be trusted. It's a tough road to walk intellectually, I suppose, Stephanie.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.